Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus Podcast. This is the back of the bus session. Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus, back of the bus sessions podcast. Today, I've got a mate on here with me. I'm buzzing for this. We've had a few boogies together and very, very, very good sessions. You know, really old drinking. But I've never spoken to you on this sort of level, a podcast level, and truly got into the real you. So welcome aboard, Curly Christy.
Hello.
I go mad for it,
That's
mate.
an introduction, man.
Oh, these headphones, man, they're going to make me look like a right plonker throughout.
Look a bit lopsided.
Bit lopsided, but we'll be right. So, Curly Christy, is that your real name?
No, my name is Christy. I wasn't born Christy. I was born Linda Ann Clayton was my name. And I was born, I know, man, in Keighley. And I was adopted. And then I became Christy Elizabeth Booth. But then the man who adopted us ran off. He was a vicar, ran off with somebody else. And he ran off, and so I became Christy Elizabeth Clare when I was about 4 or 5, I think.
Oh, wow. I like that you know the true origin story of it all.
I do. I didn't until later in my life, but yeah.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, man.
And you've always been curly, though?
I haven't always had curly hair. It was when I was 13. I think it was either hormones or I don't know what else.
Something happened.
Something happened to the head, and it started to go really
you got
curly.
shocked one day.
Yeah. That can happen, you know. If you have a sharp knock to the head, or if you get hit in a way, then it can change your hair from curly to straight. So that's why I say that. I don't know what happened, but I'm going to blame it on hormones. I think. And then it just started to go, and it just gets curlier and curlier. And bigger and bigger.
You've already started off the podcast going down a cool path, but adoption, did you find out later that you were adopted then, or did you know from a really early age?
I always knew I was adopted. So it was just part of my story. There was just one of those things that you're adopted. I had an older sister, she was adopted from a different family. So I don't remember being told ever, because it was always they were very honest about it. But I didn't meet my birth family. I knew nothing about them until I was 35. And I had Joni, a little ginger girl was born. And all of a sudden I was like, Ash, I need to know my story, man. You know.
Wow.
And there was always open and honest, but it wasn't, adoption's not very well understood. Even now it's not really very well understood, I think. And there's just a gap. You have a gap at the beginning of your life. And it's really important. You know, Ella, your little girl, she knows who mummy and daddy are. She knows that she grew up on the farm. She knew that she's there, and she'll always know that. Whereas so I was born, but in hospital for 3 weeks. And in that time, I wasn't allowed any physical touch or anything. So my birth mum was in hospital with me, but she was only allowed to feed me from the end of the crib by bottle. No breastfeeding, no cuddles or anything. And I know now from being a psychotherapist just how important those 3 weeks were. And also throughout in the womb, I knew as a baby, as an embryo, that there was never that connection, because she knew she was going to have to give me away. Wow. So it was always there. So I think it really does impact on how you then, your first ever brain stems start in the womb. You know, they're the very first things. And your hippocampus starts to grow as soon as you're conceived in the womb. And that's your memory, that's your photo bank. So all of that time, the 9 months and then the 3 weeks, that was me living with no connection at all, really.
So because she'd already succumbed to, I'm not going to make a connection with this baby, that goes into your neurons, into your psyche, into the path.
And also, I mean, on meeting her, which I can talk about later, there's that, she wasn't horrible. She wasn't rejecting me. And in fact, if anything, she wanted to keep me. And so she had a year-old daughter called Paula Ann. This is a funny story. She's called Paula Ann. And then I was born, but the Scottish Aberdeen grandma said, don't bring that kid back here. She's not coming back here. We've already got one. And so it was given that I was going to be given up for adoption. She had to raise £23 to give me away for adoption. And then she had, and then went straight out. And I've got another sister who's about 9 months younger than me. So she went straight out and actually didn't want to give the baby away, so conceived again. And so she kept 3 children, and I was given away. I always say it's because I was ginger. Did you give me away because I'm ginger? But yeah, so I was born Linda Ann.
Right.
And then adopted. And then I went into foster care for 3 weeks. and then went to my adoptive family at 6 weeks old.
Wow. And what were they like as people?
My adoptive family, really amazing. I mean, my mum's just died in January, so my adoptive... I often have a problem because people will say, do you mean your adoptive mum? And actually, she was my mum, you know, and
Yes,
she is
yeah.
my mum. And I have a birth mum, but I've also got an adoptive mum. But she's my mum. But she died in January. And my dad, he became my dad when I was about 5, I think it was, because the man who adopted us, he left us. And so then we went, and so my dad is an amazing guy and still alive and kicking, big in the Labour Party, really. And my mum is amazing. I still say she is amazing because she is. She still kind of stays with me. So yeah, really lucky.
But
and go on.
To quote unquote, was it normal upbringing in some way or another, or what was the upbringing like in general?
Very
Holidays?
religious. Yeah, generally. So they went on and had another child together. So my mum had miscarriages, which is why she adopted. And I went just the other week, I took Joni to the grave of one of the children who was 9 months old and stillborn, which before scans, before any of that stuff. And it was when I was there, I really realised that had that baby not died, I probably wouldn't have been adopted by my mum. So my whole life, and it's a really strange thing, I'm not pleased the baby died, but I would have had a very different experience in life. And there's that gamble with adoption. It's easier to adopt a dog than it is. No, it's harder to adopt a dog than it is to adopt a child. You know, and we only had, I think in like 1875, we had the RSPCA was formed. And it wasn't until 52 years later, the NSPCC were formed. So we've been protecting animals far longer than we've been protecting kids in this country.
Wow.
And I still think that's a bit there today. Have you ever tried to adopt a dog? But it was normal, very Christian family. And I think that's impacted on me. And again, with reasons that we can talk about. But no, normal, loving. Then they had my brother. He was the birth son, if you like. And yeah, holidays and caravans and loads of kids' camps and stuff, lots of camping and
Butlins.
Outdoors. No, because they were Christian camps. They were called Pathfinders. So it wasn't indoctrinated. And my dad also really taught me to break the rules. He's a school teacher. He's been a deputy head. He's a very, very moral man. And my mum was as well. But they quite liked my wild approach to life, and it's always been there. I've always been the wild card in the family. They always knew I was going to go off the rails, if you like, but I don't think it is off the rails, it's just a different rail. But
that's a nice
there
saying.
was just that kind of, there was a lot of expectation and pressure about the church, but I was also taught to break the rules. I was taught to break the rules on uniform and harmless things, you know. And if there's a no entry sign, why is there a no entry sign? Why do you have to do that?
Things.
Yeah, and taught to question all the time. And my dad always said, question everything. And I say the same to my kids.
Wow.
Now, and even with Isaac and Joni, if I say, no, you're not doing that, they've always been allowed to say, why?
Yes.
You know, why is that? And actually then if they come up with a reason that means I'm wrong, I'm very happy to be like, you're right, actually. Why does it matter if you stay out till 7:30? You know, why is that? And if they're wrong, then I will still say no. And even if they're right and I say no, it still stands.
So with their approach, and they enjoyed that curious mind about you, and they encouraged it, was there any punishment, or was that a struggle, or did they like it when you'd been a little bit off the rails?
No, I think it pissed them off.
Yeah.
I would, in hindsight, at the time, I would have said they were harsh. Like some of, the punishments might have been harsh, but they needed to wind my neck in every now and again. And I do think there's a boundary setting, isn't there? And it's about safety and stuff. But and I think everybody's own personal experience of being a child carves how you are. So, I get it very wrong as a parent. I get it very wrong and I lose my shit. And then I have to go and apologise and say, I'm really sorry, that was my bad, it wasn't your bad. And there is that kind of thing. But, I mean, it was in the 70s. And I think what my dad says is that he said with John Ross, who's my brother, who was the birth son, he knew every step of the way what John was going to do. Whereas with me, he said, "You just shocked the shit out of me, man."
Yeah.
You know, you think you're going to go that way, and all of a sudden you went that way. And I think, and he just said he could never work it out. And I think when I had Isaac and Joni, I can remember looking at Isaac in the hospital and just thinking, you're my first ever blood link. I've never had a blood link. And I don't think blood's thicker than water, you know, I just think it's one of those things. But he was my first ever blood link. And the only reason I would ever lose Isaac was if I got it wrong. I'd have to get it really wrong for to lose him. So yeah, it's a strange, the link between blood links and what isn't. And also when you think about our house and how we live, and it's so open and free. And I wonder if I hadn't been adopted, whether I would be like that or not.
And can we go to the religious route as well? Sort of, when you mentioned that, you said we'll get to it. What do you think the implications were there? Did you repel that, or did you enjoy?
I kind of lived it
that?
for quite a long time, and then I dropped out probably like Joni's age, maybe early teens, and then went back again. But I think there was something about being connected with my family as opposed to being connected with God. I don't. People talk about the church. They try and separate the church from God and Jesus, and I just can't do that. I was sexually abused by a vicar, and Jesus didn't protect me. He didn't protect me. And if anything, if he's overwatching and seeing everybody, he let that happen.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And there's this thing where people say, oh, but it wasn't Jesus who did that. It was the church that did that. And it's just like, no, that man was in the eye, like Jimmy Savile shit. You know, it's just that kind of in the public eye in there. So, but there's lots of things that I do still live with. You know, I think some of my... I like to believe I do the right thing. I like to believe I think carefully about my choices. There was something about a routine and a belonging, but then I did absolutely rebuke it, and I have nothing at all to do with it now. And I have this argument sometimes, you know, in the when my mum was really ill, my dad said to me, you know, you need to pray for your mum. And I said, you know, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. It doesn't mean I don't wish her well.
Yeah.
It just means I'm not going to pray for her to stay alive because I don't believe Jesus would keep her alive. So it's a strange one. And I think the church is an organisation that needs to be challenged on a lot of things.
Yes.
Because it's... they like to take people in. So it's a lovely place for all those little odd, you know, the misfits, if you like. And you can go into a church and be accepted. But I don't think the understanding of society and the way that our brains work and things like that, you know, this is just about let's pray and make this better. Let's look after these people. So I have nothing to do with the church at all now.
I think it's just taken by opportunists, and you know, there's a lot of beautiful message and metaphor within the writings, but when they say God said, it's like, well, God didn't have a pen. He didn't write all this down. This is done by mostly men over time and time again.
An amazing storybook.
Yes.
With some really the Bible is an amazing storybook with some wonderful... I've quoted the Bible at you when we talked about the log and the spelk in the eye. And there is that kind of... There is so much... they're not unhappy memories, particularly.
I think there's a few people come to mind. First one, what you were saying there. Have you heard Stephen Fry when he was asked... what would you do if you met God? What conversation would you had? And it's so powerful. It gets me, like the hairs on my skin going up, because he goes, how dare you? Babies born with... And he goes into this like tirade of all the disgusting things through humanity.
Done,
and why would he allow this? And again, another guy, though, that had a really beautiful ideology and belief on Christianity. He is... not James McAvoy, who's another good actor. Matthew McConaughey.
Okay.
Yeah, he did a podcast, and again, he was explaining how he doesn't follow everything literally. He just handpicks the bits that work for him. And when it talks about the burning bush, if he can't decipher, Peacock will be going on for the rest of the day.
I was laughing at the burning bush.
When he talks about different metaphors within there, if he doesn't get to choose and decipher what that means to him, and it doesn't resonate and can't implement it in his life, he just lets it go. He doesn't literally follow every step behind. He just goes, oh, that message there, and maybe I could think of a different story, the ocean, and I know certain ones. Who's the guy with a catapult killed the big guy?
Oh, Goliath.
There you go, Goliath. He was mentioning that sort of story, but just saying how he can take messages from that and implement that in his life, where, you know, be the underdog. You can still get through. You can still work. Hello,
There's
you.
the underdog.
Yeah, it's a literal underdog. We've just had a dog rampaging, guys, if you're only listening to this. But yeah, that was a real nice way that I saw him decipher the messages in the book.
Yeah.
Do you feel a similar way then?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a chapter in the Bible called Proverbs, and when I think we'd had a conversation about people being horrible about each other, basically, and judging. I've got a real, I really believe I'm non-judgmental completely. And I mean, as a psychotherapist, you have to be non-judgmental in your work, but I have no care given about what music somebody likes or what clothes they wear, or as long as they're nice, as long as they're nice and kind. And we segregate ourselves into, you know, hang around with the hippies, hang around with the townies, whatever, and things like that. And there's a thing in the Bible that says, worry not about the speck in your friend's eye, but worry about the log in your own eye. You know, and there's things, and when we were bored in church, and this is a little bit of rule breaking that my dad used to give me, we'd sit in church, shitless and cold normally, because there's such cold buildings, and you'd turn to Proverbs, and there's just some really funny, little like quirky sayings, you know, and that in itself is just something that gives a bit. And I think the stories and the metaphor that is used in them is really apparent.
And the community and coming together for a common purpose, common cause, like you say, a bit of structure, routine, something to build towards. And if you look at the 12 commandments, they're on point. Go by those. Don't go and kill people. Love
definitely.
thy neighbour. Love it. It's very much here's a bulk list of things you can follow, but then it's when people start going into the real intricacies and say,
and it's when they start saying, you know, homosexuality is wrong, or bisexuality,
but you've
or
got to love
transgender.
everybody, and you're like, well, where's the contrast there? Where's the
and
irony?
there's a funny, my dad, I mean, one of my dad's friends is a vicar, and there's two vicars that they know, and one of them believes that everybody goes to heaven despite what you do, which kind of means, why would you bother, you know, following Christianity all your life in a way? And then the other one believes that if, you know, if you've got to be saved to go to heaven. I don't believe any of it, but it's just, I think, and it's good to be interpreted in whatever way is needed, isn't it? I mean, that's okay.
I'll go delicate here, but you were talking timelines, and even in the embryo, how important that time is in your life. And then when you're separated from your mother, so you've got like 0 to 5 here, which is a really important time. Again, a very important and transitional and evolutionary time in the timeline. When you had that sexual abuse, were you quite young then?
It started when I was 9.
Wow.
And it finished when I was 16.
Oh my life.
And it was because it finished just before I was 16. Well, no, it didn't. It finished when I was 16, but that was because I never went back and saw him again. I knew what was going to happen. And as it happens, it wasn't, I mean, it was awful. Obviously, it was awful. But it wasn't as gruesome and as horrible. I work with sexual abuse, obviously, so I hear horror stories every day. And I definitely got off lightlier than other kids. He did go on and do worse things to other children. So I was kind of I was his training camp, if you like, you know, that kind of how far can I go? And I knew if I went back and he upped his game, that would be a different kettle of fish, especially in the 80s, 90s, early 90s, where it would have been, she was 16, she was legal, she was consensual, you know, and nothing would have been done about it. So yeah, and it was just like, he was an outlandish character. So when you think about the Jimmy Savile thing, I watched some of the documentary the other night, and I realised he used his character to get away with it. So that is what he was like. He was outlandish, he was wacky, he was a bit of a crazy vicar, one of those annoying, I'm cool because I'm wacky vicars. And everybody looked up to him, everybody thought he was great. And my dad had been a teacher, and obviously I knew this was happening. I'd never told anybody at all until I was an adult. And I knew that he would climb into bed with me, and he'd just, you know, I don't need to go into the details of that. But he kind of got away with it. And then my dad, when I went off the rails of it, I had anorexia, I suddenly stopped eating, like my body, you know, nobody could understand, really, because I just got on with things and everything was fine. I had a very happy family. But then I'm losing my train of thought here. He used that kind of outlandish character to groom me, and that was it. I went off the rails, and then my dad was kind of saying, He'd helped people all his life. So my dad spent his life talking to parents about how to support and look after their wayward teenagers. And this guy said, send her to me, basically. I'll look after her and I'm good with kids. I can do this. And I went down, and it was that weekend he upped his game, and I was 16. And funnily enough, I left that time, never went back to see him ever again. He denied me ever staying with him, which he tripped himself up in court, which was hilarious. Because he corrected me on a location. He said, "You mean Coventry?" I was like, "But you said I'd never stayed with you." So he dropped himself in it completely. But he just abused that friendship with my dad in that situation with my dad. And I came home, I never saw him again, and I left home. I fell out with my family and everything. I just left home. And now I know that it was just that running away from that whole, not knowing who to trust, not wanting to tell my dad that one of his best friends was doing this, but also wondering where. And I think some of this comes from adoption. You've given me away, you're not looking after me, this is happening. And your head as a kid is just scrambled by that. And I have been quite alone. Do you say lone fish? I've been alone something. And I've kind of had a journey of relying on myself and not allowing myself to rely on anybody else, really.
Wow. When did your dad find out about this?
I was like maybe 40. I reported it to the police about 4 years ago. I'm 47 now. So yeah, 42, 43. And I rang my dad, and I tell you what I was going to do. I rang my dad and I said, I need to talk to you about Richard Landau. I can say his name. You can Google him. He's in prison for 23 years. And I went to the police. I said to my dad, I rang my dad, I said, I'm going to talk to Richard Landau, and I'm just going to tell him to stay away from me and to stay away from the family. He hadn't been in touch with me for years. And then my mum and dad were at the seaside at Sands End near Whitby, and there was a picture of him. So he'd been away, and the picture just pissed me off. I was just like, you're still there, larging it up with my mum and dad, knowing what you did to me. And I said, I'm just going to message him. I need to tell you what he's done. And my dad said, okay. And he said, but before you do, he said, just read about him, really. So I did. I read about him. And there'd been accusations, mainly from adults, that had been made. And he'd just got away with them all. But because he was a vicar and in the army, he was a military man. So they got kind of cast aside, but still reported on. And at that point, when I read that, I thought, no, I'm going to have you. I'm going to take you. I was just going to give him a friendly, like, back off, stay away. And so I went to the police and I told them my story. And that was an incredible experience where suddenly things just came flooding back. It was just like shit and that and that and that. But really helpful, really healing.
Was it?
And then it took 4 years to go to court. Yeah, and that was awful. And because I work with kids who disclose, you really realise people think you tell your story and then they get trialed. And the 4 years wait is just nerve-wracking and agonising. And then since then, there was another 2 girls came forward after I reported. And then since the court case, another 2 victims have come forward.
Wow.
And now there's a lawyer working. And it's got those echoes of the Jimmy Savile type stuff, really, all in the name of the Church of England.
What's your mindset towards people who commit these acts of now? Because, do you know, when you tell it to me, I'm a really compassionate person, I feel. I've got a lot of love in my heart. And there's forgiveness in your heart for certain people of the demographic in life. For those sort of people, I've just got only anger built in. As soon as I hear it, I have aggression, anger, hatred, and all these terrible emotions just override me. And I think if it ever happened to my daughter, I could kill someone. I'm not even exaggerating. I have the potential. I'm a Ripley boy. I've been grown up by violence in my life, and we've always sort of done our problems in that way. And then I've matured and learnt to not do it in that way. But for those people of society, I've got a real low tolerance towards it. It runs into me and I go, I'd kill.
I think it's really hard because, again, for everything that happens in the womb and as you brought up, I mean, I really believe that will have had a massive impact on him. And I don't know his story. I don't care about his story. But I could accept that there will have been reasons why he did what he did. And And I also think what happens now when I work with sexual abuse is that our offenders are becoming younger and younger. So you'll hear cases of like a 9-year-old boy who's, even older girls, you know, who's pinned down a girl and tried to rape them or whatever. And so if you suddenly shift that mindset slightly into, if you're looking at a 13-year-old lad who's being accused of something, your heart changes slightly, because then you're like, why is he doing that? What is the need? Has he been sexually abused? Has there been domestic violence? I mean, there's a million reasons why people are sexual offenders.
I suppose the gravitas is always past 18. When you're thinking of somebody adult, for people under the age of 18, with mental health, with any element of their life, I feel they've got to get out of jail. They haven't, but it takes it away slightly. But as soon as somebody gets past 18,
you should have the
dealings with emotion, the dealings with the society we've built, the rules we've conducted, everything within it, there's a cut-off point, isn't there? There's got to be a cut-off point. Even for people that stay trapped in their trauma or trapped in their bad psyche, you go, okay, but now you've got to not be a victim, you've not got to be this. It's really hard to say, but you do have to eventually come out of it, and the cut-off point. So yeah, for somebody who's a genuine adult...
I mean, you get paedophiles who are maintained paedophiles, so they kind of... they know that they're attracted to younger children, but they don't act upon it. So you get people who know they do that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the horrible thing is I mean, 1 in 4 children get sexually abused.
Yeah.
We're only a footstep away from a paedophile. And, you know, so there's those people who know that they are. And it's like anger, isn't it? If you know you're angry and you drink Stella and you're going to kick off, don't drink Stella.
Yeah.
You know, and you're right when you say this. And I think the same about triggers. I mean, I've got a real bugbear about triggers at the moment, and it's such a trendy word to use, that we get triggered by this, we get triggered by that. And my big thing about triggers is that if you know what we can't expect the world to change around you. So if I get triggered by sexual abuse, which I don't as it happens, but if I did, I couldn't live my life avoiding sexual abuse, hearing about it, knowing about it, watching a film about it. You know, I couldn't avoid that. So I need to respond correctly to my trigger. I know that is a trigger, and therefore I need to make my behaviour respond appropriately, which we talk a bit more about with reactions. But I don't feel any anger towards him, and I don't wish him dead, although that has shifted slightly since the court case. And I think my biggest thing was my story being heard and me acknowledging that was it. And then that did affect me in my life, you know, the way I form my relationships with people and things like that. So it was a good thing, but I just wanted my story to be heard, and I wanted him to hear it. I wanted to let him know that he scared me. He destroyed my relationship with my mum and dad for quite a long time. I left home at 16. I managed, but it wasn't ideal, you know. And so there was that kind of thing, and I wanted him to be heard. I wanted me to be heard in front of him. And I challenged him in court. I spoke to him directly. And then there was the thing about the sentence. I had to wait. I think the last time I was up here, I was waiting for him to be sentenced. And that was agonising. I didn't expect 23 years. I mean, people get in prison for 4 years, 5 years for this kind of shit. And 23 years gives you a understanding of the level of what he was doing, I guess. But the sentence didn't matter to me at all. I wanted his wife to know what he'd done. I wanted his kids to know what he'd done. I wanted his people around him who respected him to know what he's done. And I don't know whether prison serves a purpose or not, but when he did get the sentence and other people came forward, I did get that. He'll die in there, and he'll be kicked to fuck in the meantime.
I've got a mate that works in prisons, and he says they don't have an easy ride.
Not at all, no. And
I
think, as I understand it, they're left in that waiting time a little bit more before they get shifted to a sex offenders prison.
Yeah.
And if anybody touched Isaac or Joni, I would absolutely kill them.
Because that's the only where the nuance lies there in my heart is I understand it's an illness, really. I would hate to be trapped in a body. I'm trapped in a body of a man who's got testosterone and really likes women. Yeah. That's hard enough as it is. That's an uncomfortable place to be. So to be in a body where you're desperate to be with a child, it's disgusting and wrong. But I've got compassion there of, I see why that's an illness. But then somewhat in society, if we have more of compassionate hearts towards them and have more open spaces where they can explain how they're feeling, more help could be provided. The ones that act on it, that's where I'm like, no, you know the rules, you know the understanding, you know where we are, and that's where the crossover is.
And it was a manipulation, you know. There's that kind of, I was born in the 70s. We didn't challenge, you wouldn't disrespect your friends, your parents' friends, you just wouldn't. So there wasn't even, you know, there were the eyes of God, because there was a church link, and there was that, and it was almost just like that was what was normal. It was deemed as normal, and it would have been wrong in a way. It wouldn't have been wrong. My dad wished I'd told him, but it would have been wrong in a way for me to say, I don't like him, Dad. You know, he's this, that, and the other, because I would have felt it was disrespectful.
I had it to me by an older boy when I lived in a different farm.
Wow, really?
Yeah, basically, a really small little area, and I don't need to go into all the details, but it wasn't pleasant. We're in a wood, and I remember like legging it home thinking, this is a really unsafe situation, don't want to be there. And I just stopped going out very much. I just didn't want to be around anybody, and I was confused at school anyway. I was bullied as a kid, and I just had this really warped vision of what people were at the time. So that's what we're talking about there, is all the different timelines of you, and you've been through all the hyper things happening. It makes a lot of sense now. That's what I said about at the start of why you're such a loving, kind, fun, eccentric character that I really enjoy being around. But it does often happen from a place of disrupt, doesn't it?
Yeah, but Joni Mitchell sings. Joni's called Joni because of Joni Mitchell, and her lyrics. She's quite hard to listen to because she's quite severe and she's quite folky, but her lyrics are magical. She's just such. If you ever get a chance to listen to some stuff, listen. But she sings a song called Shadows and Light, and it opens up with every picture has its shadows and it has some source of light, and it's so true. You know, every story has a shadow. Every story has a bit of a negative connotation to it. But from that, there is a source of light. And you see, I wouldn't have helped the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children I've helped without my experience, I don't think. Although I've never really thought of it like that. You know, my mum and dad, we used to have foster kids on top of me and Heidi being adopted and the birth son. There was also kids would come in and stay at our house. So I came from a very open house and a loving house. And I'd like to think I'm kind and kind of on it, you know, and I do. I mean, and I say to the kids, you know, keep your heart nice, keep your heart fresh and nice, always look up and keep your heart nice. And there is something, when we talk about reactions earlier, I think Joni was having some moments with teenagers, and they can be horrible to each other, and they're just vile sometimes. And there's so much blame in the world. So, you know, I could blame everything. I could blame adoption. I could blame sexual abuse. I could blame all kind of church. But that doesn't help me. If I can acknowledge it and know that they had an impact, then I can carve and move and shift into a space that works with that. There's no point me dwelling on it.
Did you blame for a while, though? Was that a big part of your character, or would you just refuse not to?
I don't know. I don't think I ever have.
That must be an anomaly, because you meet a lot of people now that the ego seems to like to be trapped by it, and it likes to have it as a running story, but not really do anything with it. Whereas you can use it to propel you, like you say, to help people, to make you into a stronger character. But it is sort of two ways to go about it, isn't it? And a lot of people go down the blaming, then the victim, and then this side. And you've just seemed to have let it channeled you into a completely different part of your life. And that must be an anomaly.
Maybe.
I don't know as many people who haven't had radical shifts or real breakdowns to get through into the other side. That seems to be what it takes. But for you to just inherently know, no, I'm not going to let it do this to me. I've not met many characters like that ever.
Yeah, no, I think and maybe that's from the lone road. Maybe that's the road of me turning round. And, you know, when you're saying you get that point, and I thought, right, I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to go and live my life doing this. I've been quite hedonistic over the years. I've definitely used my party life to eradicate some of that stuff, I would imagine. But when I talk to other people about fallouts, and and it's like, and she did this and she did this and she did this, and it's like, but how did it make you feel? What happened was irrelevant, actually. If somebody's really horrible to you, that blaming them for what they did, and actually we need to look at our reactions.
Yeah,
and that made me feel hurt. Why did that hurt me so much? Why did her accusing me of that make me hurt so much when I know that I'm right and I'm in a truthful place? And we really need to step back and look at ourselves and think, this is how we are, and this is what triggers are about. A trigger, if it happens around you, you're never going to change that trigger. So you need to work with yourself in order to make sure that your resilience comes out at the right time, so that you can hack it, really.
And so then you left home really early as well, because that's quite 16. Again, you're not quite all there yet.
No,
usually.
I thought I was.
Again, if we're thinking of transformative parts of your life, that's a big one. And you just left home. What did you go on to do at this point?
I left home. I think I started on my A-levels and lasted a year and got really business studies.
Oh,
because obviously I was going to be a businesswoman. So lasted a year and quit that. And then I did a BTEC course. So I must have left about that time. So continued with that, but half-assed, like I wasn't there and didn't do anything. And I went to live in a bed set. I'm from the northeast. So I was born in Keighley, West Yorkshire, then moved to Bradford, then got adopted to County Durham. So this was all dead early on. Lived in County Durham, and I lived in a bedsit in Darlington there with this guy called Clive. The homeowner was there. Lovely guy, really. He really looked after me. It was unsafe when you think about it, but he was sound. There was nothing untoward about him. And I lived in a bedsit there, and it was a bit of I can remember getting a McDonald's cup. Because I got £23 a week to live on. I think I paid like £4 rent or something. And then I had to buy my food and stuff. And having a McDonald's cup and mixing it with Newcastle Brown Ale and then topping it up with vodka.
Oh, wow.
And that was my night out.
Did you have a name for that concoction?
Drunk.
Yeah.
Hammered.
Just for Saturday.
But it was. And drank it through a straw walking into town. But so that it wasn't... I think if I thought my kids were in that situation, it might not be ideal. But then I was dead lucky. I've gone through life and not come into any dreadful places. Straight into the music scene, straight into gigs.
Performing yourself or just...
I have performed. I don't perform and I'm not musical. But I did there was a band called Mojo Rising, and they were a bit Jim Morrison, Jim Morrison type stuff. And... I used to play tambourine and do backing singing for them. And I did in front of Dave Stewart from Eurythmics. Went to this club. We did Battle of the Bands in London called Club Orange. Boom.
Yeah.
And did play with them for a bit in front of Dave Stewart, but only messing around.
That's stunning, though.
And then I did sing in the church as well when I was younger and all of that. And I do love tambourine. I could be a Bez, I think. I'd be a good Bez.
I think you'd be a great Bez. You've been the Bezes of our festivals, mainly.
Every now and again there's just this
you
ginger
just bring the energy straight down. It's like everyone's sort of just bopping about, and then you turn up and it's like, rising like fire.
That's a great thing to say. Thanks.
I love it. It's very true. I mean, what a journey. So at what point, what is it you do now? What's your actual job title? So
I've just left my job yesterday.
Let's get into the meat of that.
And I think what happened last year was that I had a mental breakdown. I had a nervous breakdown basically, and I went to go on holiday in August. And you know me, I'm out in the van all the time. So all year, especially summer time, I'm out, and I just cancelled everything, just stopped everything. I think I came here in October. I think I come here because it was a safe place to come to. So if I was going to other places, I cancelled a lot. But coming here, I knew it was safe and I knew people around me. But just took to my bed and slept. And it was the court case. It was just this reality. And I think after it, I can only describe this as like a tumour, a cancerous growth. Now, I've never had cancer, but my best mate did die of cancer 2 years ago. And this kind of tumour that had been hanging around with me for 36 years. And the court case just released that. Him going to prison, him being found out, released that. And when you talk to people who've recovered from cancer, they suddenly have a second chance. And they're suddenly like, so they don't put as much emphasis on whether the kids do well at school. They don't worry, you kind of live your life a little bit more freely and making choices and doing it, as opposed to saying, I've got to work this long and I've got to do this and I've got to do this. And I really felt a freedom given to me. And Joni came out of school, she went into home ed, and I entered into January. The breakdown was horrible, and I never, ever want to go back there, and it frightens me. And I was frightened to go to sleep. I was frightened to wake up. And I know so many people who will listen to this who will know that that is what happens, you know, but I'd never experienced it on such a mass scale. It was just, my whole life stopped. And it was scary to do anything. And then I kind of picked myself up, went back to work a little bit. I only worked with sexual abuse, so it was there all the time. And I found myself being triggered for the first time ever. And that really worried me. Went straight and dealt with it. I don't mess around. It was like, right, get into therapy, sort this out. Sorted it out. And then woke up in January. It was like, get back on it. Come on, Christy, 2022, here we are. And then my mum died. I was just like, fucking hell. So it was just a kind of it's just been a shit 6 months. But it has given me a vision that has just gone, boom, we can do this. I can do what I want. And I don't need to be, my job's kind of done with that work now. And there's a lot of younger therapists coming through, and it'll all keep on going. I'm not saving the world, so, and just to put my energy and that care and love into something else, and something that isn't, I don't need to hold a million horror stories in my head. I've got and you will as well, from working in schools and stuff. I've worked in secondary schools, primary schools, ever since I was in my 20s, worked at the youth offending team. So I've always been involved with kids, and always the kids who, the reason I became a therapist was because I knew they were wanting to tell me something. You'll have worked with those kids, and it's almost like their lips are bubbling with I want to tell you this, I want to tell you this, and they can't tell you. But each one of them is the heavy story. I've only ever worked with the kids who'd be dysfunctional or naughty or whatever they were. And I love them, absolutely. And they've done so many wonderful things. But I just think with them, I'm not saying I'm wonderful, you know what I mean? And now I look at Joni in particular and my family, and I just kind of think, there's a bit of time given back to them now.
Have you got any beautiful anecdotal moments working with certain students?
Oh, I mean, loads who... some of the most striking ones have been teenage girls who've been sexually exploited, and then they've gone and talked in court and got their exploited. Sexual exploitation is very different to abuse, and deals with different levels of grooming and stuff. But, I used to... Oh, I've got so many stories. Now I can't think of one to tell. I once took a kid from St Anne's. He lived in St Anne's, and I took him down to the ice arena ice skating. And on the way there, he asked me if there'd be lions. Would there be lions in town? He'd never been out of St Anne's. And I was like, we're just going ice skating, mate. We're not going to Ice Age. It's just in town, and just never been out. And I once took a group of kids to Hartington Hall in a youth hostel. And there was a lad walking past me through Dovedale, and he was dead shifty, like stuff in his pockets like this. I thought, what's he doing, man? And after a while, I says, what are you doing? And he just looked at me and he went, nothing. I said, it's all right. His pockets were bulging. I was like, what have you got? What have you been getting? And he'd been collecting the sheep wool off the barbed wire and stuffing it in his pockets, but he thought he was stealing. So he was like, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, Christy. And I was like, no, man, it's like, take as much wool as you want, man.
What was he planning to do with it? Do you know?
No, I told him about we could weave it and spin it. I think he did, yeah. He made a little box for the head teacher as well, which, considering what kind of kid he was, he didn't have a dead close relationship with the head teacher, but the head teacher was ace. But and he'd nicked that. But that day as well, I had a girl with me who eventually came to live with us after a while. She lived with me, Joni and Isaac, and her baby. That was 3 or 4 years ago. She came and lived with us. That was gorgeous, really lovely. I was called Nanny C for ages, but then she just wasn't in a good place. But I found her with a breeze block above this Range Rover. She was just stood going, I'm going to chuck it in, all these posh bastards, I'm going to chuck it in. And we just stood there going, please don't. And she didn't, fortunately.
She was just angry that they had
money. Just angry, and I think and out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You take a load of kids from St Anne's.
Wow.
And I can appreciate, yeah, man, I'm from this family where we went walking, we did that kind of stuff. And there is that comfort zone, isn't there? And it's kind of good to stretch it, but it's also really scary for them.
I think those are the important things I wish schools put a bit more time and effort into, is getting them just experiences.
Yeah.
One lad, I've got a good friend called Tony, and he takes kids out all the time to do different things. And he lives in Lancaster, and he took him to the Trafford Centre, and the kid was just looking around perplexed and said, Tony, are we on holiday?
Yeah.
It was just so beautiful though.
Yeah, they do. They just don't have those experiences.
For them to just go down the road, be in a shopping centre and think that that's what a holiday is their parameter. You think, oh dear.
Yeah. We used to wake up, I'd get the school minibus and I'd go and pick up 16 kids in the morning. So Isaac, he always came with me. So from the age of 5, he was driving round on icy mornings, St Anne's, picking up kids. And I genuinely believe a lot of that is why his character is so gentle. And we'd bring him up, a breakfast would be given, he'd just be part of them. It'd be like, right, get your breakfast, then wash the face, clean the teeth, line them all up. And they used to call me the Von Trapp family. And then I'd go into school and I'd work with them through the school and be kind of there to, you know, pick up the pieces when it all went wrong for them. And then after school, we'd take them out and we wouldn't take them home till 10 at night. So we'd just keep them out doing activities just so they could get out of their homes, really. And they have so many good, like took them to Cornwall camping, some really risky things. Took a load of kid tombstoning, you know, where you jump off the coast.
Yeah, of course.
And none of them could swim. They're all about 3 times bigger than me. I had Isaac on this tow rope thinking, God, you can't swim. I can't really swim. And then we give them shellfish. That night we went winkle picking or something, cooked up them, and then one had a fish, what is it, shellfish allergy.
Oh, no.
So we had to get an ambulance. But
Did
yeah,
like an EpiPen and stuff like that?
We didn't know until that time. We'd never had a winkle.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they?
Not from farm food. But yeah, no, loads of memories, and I love working with them.
One part of the story we've not got to is when you met your biological family.
Oh, yeah.
So let's go there.
Yeah.
So you say you were 30 or 40?
35, 36, yeah. So
wow.
Joni was born. I had Isaac, and he was a little boy, but blonde, you know, and I was really thankful for that, I have to be honest. But anyway, he was blonde. And then Joni came along, and there was something about having a little girl with ginger hair, and she did just look like me. And I think there was that, I've got no early born photographs of me. There's no birth photos, there's nothing. So my first photos, I'm quite a big chunky baby. I was like 10 pounds, I think, or 8 pounds 10. I was a beffa baby. But and then there was something about having her that just really triggered that. I need to know. And what am I going to pass on to my daughter? What story? What, you know, when people talk, oh, you've got your mum's hips, you've got your mum's boobs, you've got this, you've got that. And none of that's ever been there with me. So my friends would talk about where their looks came from or whatever. And I never knew where my hair came from or anything. And there was just something that I felt was needed to be known so that Joni could know where her ginger hair came from. I mean, it's a very important part of our lives, as you know. But,
identity.
Yeah. And so I went and I was training to be, I'd done a history degree years and years ago. I was going to be a teacher. And then went into schools and did that wellbeing stuff. And then was training to be a therapist. And I Googled, Jane had been born. She
ginger
was about
people.
2 years. Yeah. How many ginger people? Where do we come from?
12 ginger people in the world.
Yeah. And I'm one of them. And I Googled it, and there was this thing. So I Googled Linda Ann Clayton, Keithley, 1974. And out came this search line, it was called, and it was a website. And there was this woman looking for her child. So she'd put this thing on. Searchline's gone since, and I did make a big complaint because I thought it was really unsafe. It was just a really unsafe practice. And then I kind of got in touch with them, and straight away, sent them an email, straight away they were like, well, they didn't come back for 6 months, and then I thought she must have died. I thought she'd gone and died, and there was a bit of a bereavement there, thinking, oh God, I'm never going to know. And then she got back in touch, but straight away they were like, Facebook name, phone number, everything. I was like, whoa, no, man. So I kind of stepped back. And took a while, and then went to meet them and everything. And it was absolutely overwhelming.
So what was it called? Safe Lines?
Searchline.
Searchline.
Yeah.
And you could just type in
and just find people that, a bit like, you remember Friends Reunited?
Yeah, okay.
A bit like Friends Reunited,
right.
But for...
So, and you say it's gone now, because it's just quite unsafe that you could basically find anybody through that.
Yeah, and I think there's such a psychological impact of that kind of meeting. You know, I sat down, I went at the Orchard Sculpture Park, and I went on my own, And I sat with her.
Any particular relevance to picking Yorkshire Sculpture Park? Or?
Vast and open, and I could run in that direction really quickly. See, it's not me. But I sat down opposite her on the little table about this size, sat down with her, and every day I've put my eyeliner on in the hall mirror for years, and sat down opposite her, and I looked in her eyes, and I was like, shit, man. And they're just my eyes looking back.
Going towards that meeting, can you remember how you felt? Because you're 35, you've been through life, older than I am now.
Yeah.
So I can't even envision it. But to be going there to see that person, it feels very heavy, very like the gravitas is there. Did it feel that to you?
I'm stubborn, but I'm strong. And there was something about me not wanting anybody to be there to support me. I was married at the time. That's something you didn't know. And didn't want anybody with me. And even now, any journey, the court case, I'm going to do that on my own. And I kind of, and I think there's a little bit of me not wanting to put on others. So I feel that people can be as much of a burden to me as they want, but the other way around, I'm a little bit like, I don't want to put that on them. So asking somebody to come with me to something like that was just alien to me. And also, I think it's unfair for me to expect the other person to know how I'm feeling when they can't possibly know how I'm feeling because they haven't met the birth parent after 35 years. So I don't remember being particularly nervous. But obviously was terrified as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it completely, yeah. The unknown.
And she was, and her main story was, I just need you to know you weren't out of a rape. There was a big thing that she really needed to let me know that I wasn't out of a rape time. And I'd never ever thought about that until then. All of a sudden I was like, oh. But she's called Alice and still keep in touch. And what I did do is that I think she struggled to understand my life. So I suppose she gave away this baby. She was only 19 when she gave me away. And she'd almost expected this baby to come back to her. So to meet a 35-year-old woman was really weird for her because she just had this image of this baby and also kind of wanted her to come, to her to sweep me up. And had I had a horrible experience of being adopted, I may well have gone, this is where I belong, I need to be with this family. But actually, I am Christy Clare, and my life is as I am. And it was a learning curve for both of us, and me really having to be firm with this is what it is. And her coming back at me and saying, but I am your mum and you can't take that away from me either. And me thinking, touche, man, you're right. That is right. And so I introduced her to my mum. Bit of a cop-out, really. So I introduced her to my mum. And they just got on great. They met and got on great.
Mum,
my mum was
is mum.
Yeah, dead thankful to each other for everything. And even when my mum died, they were some of the first in touch to say really sorry.
Wow.
And it's a lovely story. It's not Rachel, the one who's just younger than me. She's very much like me. She's into climbing. And then we just have these weird things. And then the other Christmas, we don't have Christmas dinner in our house. The kids choose what they want.
Nice.
So we had curry the other year. And she'd had curry for her Christmas dinner, and just dead weird little links that we are very, very alike, but have never, ever met until I was 35.
That's 36. Interesting. You sometimes hear with twins that get separated at birth. Have you heard of stories where they've ended up going on totally different paths, but they'll have like the same instrument they play, or they'll have something identical
those
that
links.
they join in with? I watched a documentary on that years ago, and it blew my mind.
It is dead
it's
interesting.
Like this universal pool of knowledge that we've all carried.
And there's a weird link and loyalty that, I do class them as part of a family that I know, and they're lovely. But it was really overwhelming. It was like for a couple of years, it was just like trying to get this balance right. And then my mum, and not needing to let her know you're not going to be replaced.
Yes.
You're my mum and I love you. And
God,
and
there's
there was
a lot of plates to spin here.
So much. And again, just really fortunate that my mum and dad were cool with it. They just embraced it, the same as the sexual abuse. They were just kind of like, you go for this, do what you need to do. So completely supportive.
You mentioned a husband there as well.
I did.
And I won't go diving into that, but I just wondered, with formulating relationships, because you've had really good relationships in your timeline, but then obviously so many rocky and mistrust relationships. Have you struggled with love in life from that and
I don't
formulating?
struggle to love. I love a lot, but I don't know. I mean, but there's romantic love, isn't there? And then there's love. And I feel very loved by people. I don't give myself up easily. And I always say to people, I have no problem with people that do. I don't think it's about being easy tiger. I don't think it's about being easy. I think it's just, I'm probably quite mistrusting. And I probably go for exciting characters, which is a bit of a hedonism. You know, it's kind of like, I know they're going to fuck me over eventually.
Yeah.
And so and I think as I've got older, that's kind of ceased a bit. And the reason I got married, I know exactly why I got married, was because it was 6 months after I'd sent the email to the birth mum and she didn't get back to me. And I thought she was dead. And I was kind of scrambling for an identity. I was at that time beginning to think, who am I? How can I anchor myself? I need to anchor myself to something, because I was just flailing around a bit. And so I said, shall we get married? And we did. Not for very long. It was a good day.
You had a party.
But after that, it was like, oh, shit,
Party
man,
will
why
do.
did I do that? And he, he wasn't very nice, was quite abusive in himself. And I think it was just a never-ending learning curve. I always get amazed by your lot, the younger ones, and how they seem so much more guided in what they want, even about having kids, when to have kids, if to have kids, the choice about having a child and things like that. I think there's a bigger maturity, whereas I came from a time where the normality was to be married, to have kids. And I think by the time I'd got to 35, which was old in a way from my generation to get married, I kind of thought maybe I should just try and settle down and be normal. And I'm not.
It did ring a thought in me of how independent you are as a person and you like to do your path. I suppose it's quite tricky at times to find another partner that's willing to allow such a
definitely.
tenacious attitude into their life.
Yeah.
Unless that's them too.
It'd take, I mean, I'm bisexual, but it would take a strong
person
to see the number of people climb in and out of my van and come just to the house, and it's Stacey McMullen, do you know him? He moved to Glasgow the other week, and he, on the day after Paddy's Day, he woke up in my bed, but I wasn't in my bed. I can't remember where I was in somebody else's bed. And I need to really clarify, this isn't about the sex, this is just people sleeping in the same bed. But he woke up next to...
having a wine and then just being like, oh, I'm here now.
Yeah, we're here, let's have a spoon. But he woke up next to Gandhi in my bedroom, no idea where he was. He's got this video where he's scanning around and saying, whose house am I in, man? And he said he said, you need to be careful about how many people you bring into your bed. And I was just like, zero fucks given, literally zero fucks given. And there is, but it would take somebody.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've got most of my friends are blokes, and they're really close friends, and the majority of them say, it's mad, Christy. There's no way anybody would be able to handle that. And then if they tried to stop me, I'd be like, see ya.
Not happening.
Yeah, man.
Have you never seen at a festival anyone where you thought, that's basically another one of me over there? Have you ever met many yous before?
In looking wise?
No, just in the way you act wise and that sort of fluid and flowing and happy to sort of eccentric and be with other people.
I mean, I'd like to think that the people who I mix with are the same, but then I also know they're probably not completely.
You're quite a special person. You are. And
my mum told me that.
The best way possible. I really do mean that.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
So with psychotherapy then, how long were you doing that work for?
I'd been a psychotherapist for 13 years now.
Wow.
And I did sexual abuse. I was in schools at first. And the reason I moved out of schools was because that's all they're the kids you're working with, they want to tell you something and you can't get it. So in a way I moved into a role where I did know they'd disclosed sexual abuse, and I've done it for 7 years. The police tend to work it for 2 to 3 years and then they moved on to a different department because it is harsh, man. So 7 years is above and beyond how long I should have done it, really.
So with working with sexual abuse, as a society, where are we going wrong with it? What sort of problems are we facing with it? Is it bureaucratic problems? Is it the structure of it and
it's
our approach?
It's not spoken about.
Yeah.
You know, and you think we had the conversation before, do we talk about this, do we not? There's an element of, you know, do you expose yourself by saying it? I also do think about anybody who would fancy having a relationship with me, although I should normally say no. That they would then see this and then be like, oh God, we're not going there, man. But, you know, there's just that, there is a thing left over, and I think we just don't talk about it. We should be teaching about sexual abuse at antenatal classes. How many people are pregnant with a baby that they don't really know who the dad is? You know, they don't know who the character is. And the reality is that if you're a paedophile and savvy enough, you will have children so that you've got your goods.
Yeah.
They're there waiting. You know, that it's perfect. COVID created a haven and a luxury for paedophiles. I mean, it just created somewhere that it could happen because everybody was locked down. And we don't talk about it. So nursery. So with, you know what FGM is? Female genital mutilation.
Yes.
So that happens around the time of 6 or 7 years old. That's when the standard operation takes place. But they don't teach about it in Britain till the kids are 12. It's right. Why? Why not teach it when they're 4 and 5? Because then they're going to tell you at 6 and 7 this is going to happen. So we teach it too late. Sexual abuse, sexual education, they do some in year 6. I mean, they do little whispers of it, but it's about bunnies and hares and things like that. So they teach it in year 6 before they go to secondary school, and then they do it again. So again, most sexual abuse takes place between the age of 6 and 9. But then most disclosures come about the age of 12 and 13, and we don't talk about because they're scared.
It's really, really fascinating.
Terrified.
Yeah.
We can talk about domestic violence. We can talk about drug addiction. We're very open about all of that stuff, but people cringe at sexual abuse still.
Any theory, extrapolation on why we have such a taboo towards it?
I think just because it is absolutely horrific. It's just a thing that they do. And bear in mind, most of it is familial abuse, or it's a friend of the family. You know, this notion of being stuck in the middle of nowhere and finding weird Pete who, you know, looks after rabbits is nil, really. It's happening under our noses. It is right under our noses. And I think it's too difficult. And I think also that a lot of the kids that I've worked with, their parents will then tell me that they've been sexually abused. And so, therefore, you've got this ongoing thing that it's just hidden. We've also got a government. When you're in prison as a paedophile, you will get offered degree courses. You'll go in the library, you know, and do that. And there's no support. There's no state support for sexual abuse victims at all. It's all National Lottery Comic Relief funded things, and we've got a government who haven't got a shiny, clean slate, have we, really?
I think we can agree upon that.
And I think we'll just, you know...
We're allowed that on this podcast.
Yeah. But I think whatever government was in, you're always going to get those sleaze bags that are in there. And it's just... It's massive. It's like a huge elephant in the room where everywhere you go, it's there. But nobody...
We all seem to know somebody that's been through it at such a young age. Everybody's got a friend or a conversation or a story comes out at some part in their life. So I'm not naive to how grand I can imagine that the statistics are towards it. And I think you penny dropped a moment for me there where I thought, why do we take this real taboo approach towards sex and education and sexual abuse at a young age, when that's when you kind of need to be equipped for, if this is happening, you need to speak out and let it be alert and known.
And know what it is.
What the signs are. Yeah.
So there's shame and guilt. You're really left. I mean, I do endless presentations on it. But we talk about shame and guilt. And one of the biggest things for children is that they will be accused of lying. So they'll either be silenced or they'll be shut down. There's either a case of, oh, he's done that to everybody for years. That's just what he does. Like, okay, so I'll just get on with it then, shall I? And then there's kids who are just terrified. And I suppose with me, that thing about not respecting their parents, how dare I go and say, this man did this to me? It would just be deemed, in my head, it would be deemed wrong. And it's just because
It's wild that we don't.
It's part of the grooming.
We don't prepare people. We let things happen and then we give solution afterwards.
Yeah.
It seems like a really silly approach.
Yeah, it is.
The preparation's the part we need to look towards, so we prevent it rather than reactive. Oh, I see.
And the financial cost to society.
Yeah.
If you were suddenly to say, right, we're going to put this into place to make sure all this happens, the financial cost would be so huge. They'd have to budget for that, you know. And there's just that horrible thing. But the financial cost of looking after people who haven't been looked after is far bigger, and it's lifelong.
Mental health and crime rate, it just seeps into everything. So it's similar with what we're doing here on a degree, is when we put on these nights and have young kids coming towards, you could look at 350 quid, 400 quid for a night. But then also you can look at, if they weren't here, what could they, criminal damage, going into the prison systems, X, Y, and Z. It goes on. So if you can show evidence of this is going to provide something for the community in the longevity, that's important to be able to do. I suppose with sexual health and sexual violence, I think everybody needs to be a part of it, don't they? It's going to kids, and then you're thinking, well, how do you tell a 5-year-old? How do you tell a 6-year-old? But then the parents need to be taught and educated. And did you have to teach parents much?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I teach them psychoeducation, so I teach about what's happening in the brain after it, to be fair, because it's too, I mean, I kind of get it too late in a way. But it's not, I've often broached with the NHS and stuff like that, working about education before it happens, but they're just not, it's just not comfy. It's not ready to be spoken. I mean, we do safe touch. The NSPCC are really good at doing it, safe touch and things like that. And there's the pants rule. Don't ask me about it because I can't remember what the acronym is. But there's these kind of things that they do teach, but it's just not. When I always say when I'm delivering training is that people don't understand the power of grooming, and it is that those words, text messages, just making. If you give a young girl self-esteem, right, because she thinks she feels amazing, and you're making her feel amazing, if the consequence of that is that you then go on to do something else, then they're in love. They have broken hearts. The minute they go to court, it's my tummy rumbling. The minute they go to court, they're broken-hearted when they go to prison because they loved their abuser. You know, it's a really normal thing to be in love with your abuser.
Very, very simply, any adult should not be saying anything
of those things,
towards a young person.
I did a safeguarding training for an events organisation just not long ago, and there was a similar thing about with WhatsApp. And, you know, you could have a WhatsApp group with a group of kids in it kind of thing, but it's about protecting yourself.
100%.
You know, against accusation.
That, again, it comes to the education towards it. It's not in your face, is it? You have to go and search for what's the protocols here, what do you do here. But the best way is to just sidestep it.
Yeah. And when you're in an organisation that looks after children who are seeking a place, you know, and you're cool and you're nice and you're this and you're, you know, handsome and whatever, then that young girl is suddenly like, wow, he's the only person who pays me any attention, actually. There's nothing going...
And boy, I suppose.
Yeah, completely. And they're just having that attention given to them. So you're in more of a position where, one, they're going to disclose to you because they'll trust you, but also there's that romanticising.
100%.
And your own language and everything is really important.
It's really fascinating to explore this path, and because it is so unspoken of, I've got so many different questions of the path.
I don't mind talking about it at all.
Did you change your approach over time in how you dealt with it and towards victims? Because you going through it, you can be empathic, but when I see people suffering with mental health and so on, when we say, oh, don't be a victim, how do you tell somebody that's been through such pain?
I think, firstly, nobody's got the right to tell anybody how to be.
Yes.
Because there's, you know, we'll talk about survivors, victims, warriors, you know, and everybody has these different words that they might want to use. The reality is it still happened. Yeah. But again, and with empathy, I think empathy is another little bugbear of mine at the minute, because everybody talks about being an empath. And empathy doesn't mean that your story impacts on the others. So me being empathy, if you were to tell me about your story in the woods, for instance, and then me say, hey, Mikey, yeah, I had this 9 to 16 years old, I had this and this, and it makes yours less
Diminish
important.
it, yeah.
And I think people think empathy is because we've experienced it. We then have the right to say, I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
this is
yeah.
it. And I don't
Suppose
know how
it's,
you feel.
more of an understanding.
Yeah, it's empathy in its true
Yeah.
form, is holding your thinking and experience, and then using the skills and the ideas that you've thought, but you don't need to divulge your story.
Yes.
You're just using what that gave you, and that's where resilience comes in. We create resilience.
Because some people deflect it then, don't they, from the person? They just say, oh, this happened to me, and then
Yeah,
they take
yeah.
their story away from them,
Yeah.
and don't allow them to process it or share their
It's shutting them
feelings
down,
towards
really.
it. Yeah, oh, this happened to me, I can help you because of this. And it's like, no, you don't. Even though there's maybe more of an understanding than somebody that's never been through this before, it's not going to be the exact same. So you're not going to feel the exact emotions of where I am. I might have a different threshold to you and so on. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I think each person is completely different. And I mean, I have worked with so many kids. And I think, especially with the like I was talking about the trigger thing, when they're getting to the point where they know how they're affected by it, there is a time in a way where you've kind of got to say, come on then, let's turn around and we need to go in that direction now. So within therapy, that is what you would do, but only when they're ready.
How do you know that then?
When the therapy's done is when my job becomes boring. That's my interpretation of it. That's not in any textbooks. But the minute, I think if you were a private therapist, you'd get paid a lot of money every hour. And there must be therapists who just get work through and think, well, that's so they can keep on coming as long as they like. But it's wrong to do that, And there is a point when I start being in a session and I don't feel physically sick, or I don't feel like I want to kill the paedophile, or I don't feel worn out or drawn. Because there's a thing called transference in therapy. So you take on what your client is feeling. If you're a good therapist, you take on what your client is feeling. So it's tiring. I mean, it's really draining. And I've thrown up in bins in rooms before, and they've left the room, and that just has sometimes you just need a big poo afterwards, because you literally just need to get rid of that. And so that happens in the session. So once that stops happening is when I think you're ready now, and this is it.
You don't know a therapist called David Eames, do you?
Don't think so.
He's Derby counsellor, but he's been doing it about 25 years. Beautiful fella, but he did the podcast a couple of weeks ago.
Oh wow, I'll have to watch it.
He said the same thing though.
Oh really?
And I don't think that was a textbook thing.
I definitely haven't watched it.
No, he said well, it's not out yet actually,
okay,
so it'll be out
then.
in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
But yeah, he said as soon as they just start talking about the weather, and we're talking about miscellaneous trivial things, it'll question, do you need me anymore? Do you really want to be here? And sometimes their answer is yes, I enjoy this. And maybe that's a need to explore as well, because that wanting my presence in your life to still get through all these hurdles isn't necessary. We need to approach that first.
And ideally they should leave with a toolkit, an emotional toolkit that just means, and every now and again they will come back. I've got kids come back years later, and then again, and I go into therapy and out of therapy. But you have your toolkit with you, and that should be what happened. They're like fledglings. I always think of them like little fledglings just going. It's like, on you go now. But it's hard for them, I think, when they haven't got a supportive family, because you kind of become a mother figure or you become a father figure, and you've got to maintain really good practice to keep that straight edged, really.
As a pie chart, what part of your job is listening, and what part of your job would be giving advice and telling them where they might need to start looking at in their lives and different sections?
I never really think I give advice. Because I help them explore their story, and it opens up what they want to explore. A lot of it's done in metaphor and objects. Very rarely do they come in and tell the story of what happened. Depends who you're working with, I think, really. And I mean, some kids just want to work in silence, and that's a real tricky one to work with. But then you'd use play and art.
So
and
quite
things
literally,
like
they
that.
don't. You say, do you want to talk at all? And
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk? And if they say no to and no and no.
Yeah, so they'll be silent, and then I would interact and say, "Are you happy with the silence or whatever?" So you know, and there's very little questions asked in therapy actually when you break it down. But I think, oh man, that's a hard one. Maybe 50-50.
I like your answer though. It is all entirely dependent on who's in front of you at the time.
And I think you go from a time where they come in and they like vomit it, I always call it, you know, they just kind of come in and go, whoa.
Yeah.
And then 6 weeks later, you'll probably, so they might talk and talk and talk and talk and talk.
Yeah.
And then 6 weeks later, they're in a place where they're able to pause, and then you interject with this, that, and that's giving them the armour really to go out into the world.
And so you've just stopped doing this?
Just yesterday I handed my notice in, and
Wow.
I think I'm going to take a little bit of time away from therapy. And moving into, I don't really know yet.
That was going to be the question.
Yeah, I don't really know. I want to do part-time work, so I want to have more time with Joni. And I have little fingers in the pies all over. I've always got my skills set. I've got my safeguarding stuff. And I mean, there's a bit of me that'd quite like to work in a deli again. You know,
Yeah.
we used to have a deli trailer. And just there's something about it's using the same things. You're serving a sandwich, it's wholesome food, it's good stuff, but it's not got the emotional content.
Yeah.
Do you want salsa?
Yeah.
So there's
I
a
bet
bit
you
of
see
me.
people have breakdowns through it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But my main plan is just to take it a little bit easier. I think I've had a rough ride, and I need to acknowledge it. I need to look at it and acknowledge it. So it's not a pity plea.
When was your breakdown? Last year?
Yeah, August it started, and then the court case finished October. And yeah, kind of just hit the floor.
Can you just talk a little bit about the process of all that then? Sort of what was the darkness like, and then what was the sort of getting away from the darkness? Did you have any tools or things to implement?
It's really interesting being a therapist and having that happen to you. And, you know, you could look at the pressures of work and the pressures of life, but I don't think it was that. I think it was the fear of the child. I think it was the fear of my 9-year-old child with this big fat man, you know, that just overtook me. And I really went through a stage where it's like, is this because I'm partying too much? You know, what is happening? This and eliminating things from my life because I just wasn't very used. You know, everybody gets a bit of anxiety. Everything happens like that. But it was just, I could not get out of bed. And I'd wake up and be scared. And I had a friend called Deb who just before COVID, she died in the September just before COVID struck, and she was like my best mate. She was awesome. So we went into COVID with that kind of thinking, you know, that bereavement, that grief going on. And she would have been right by my side throughout the whole thing. She would have been somebody I'd have been allowed as well. I would have allowed her to be with me and do it. And she wasn't there, and there was just the energy. So I'd have a meeting at work, and then I would literally kind of climb into bed. And it was just, everything was just I was becoming less interested in people coming to me and telling stories. And I am somebody who comes and listens to people. And I was finding that my attention wasn't staying. I was losing, and I was just full. I was full to the brim, and my resources weren't being replenished. There was nothing, resourcing me. So, and I just took to my bed, and I think it was just the fear. And the apprehension, the waiting. What if you go to court and you tell that huge story and then they say, no, this isn't true, she's lying? You know, that would have just rocked my world, more so than it rocked my world. And I think there was that kind of, it is such a heavy job working in that kind of line of work that you, if you're not, it's not, and I don't mean this in a shit way, but it's not like going and serving in a shop. At that time, I went to work. That's when I brought the chicken. Where I did the chicken trailer with Guianne, because it was just like, I can do this, and I'm good at this. But I couldn't give. I wasn't available to people particularly, and I hated every minute of it. Obviously, it sounds a silly thing to say, but I hated the fact that I wasn't available.
Yeah.
And I knew that there were people around me who were struggling, and normally I'd be like, da-da-da-da-da, and I couldn't. I had none of that in me.
Have you ever watched the film Hector's Search for Happiness?
No, I don't.
That's going to be yours today. It's Simon Pegg, who I love very much.
I
Fellow
like him.
Ginger.
Yes, man.
He is a therapist, and at the start of the film, he just is going into work, and you just see more and more, and he's just getting distilled by it all and plateauing, and then eventually he goes for this massive breakdown in front of a client, and then he goes traveling, and there's this whole journey, and finds himself, and he goes back into therapy a completely new person. And it just reminded me a bit of that story there.
We work with the window of tolerance. There's a model called the window of tolerance, and this is, we all have a window of tolerance. It's about, I always put it in my body like this, but it's about this big. And what that means is, in the day, you wake up, and on a Monday you might feel a bit like, you won't because you've got this lovely idyllic life, but you wake up on a morning and you're like, oh my God, I've got to get up today, got to go, go to work, and you go downstairs and there's no milk in the fridge, or the kids have lost their car keys and things like that. So all the time you're heading up this scale. And as you leave the house, I used to use this with Joni and say, it's cake sale day or fancy dress day at school. And that'd be when you'd lose your shit. All of a sudden, you're like, what? So you leave your window of tolerance and you get angry. Or the other side to leaving your window of tolerance is that you slump into a darkness. But we all live with quite a wide window of tolerance, and we normally bob along. Like, even if today the panic with Ella. So, oh my God, my day's just suddenly gone on. Christy's coming, and then all of a sudden, oh, she's been to hospital, she's okay. So you can resume without having a meltdown.
It's like a wave.
Yeah, it's like we tolerate, and we've got a tolerance of the world. The minute you have a trauma, the minute you have a death, a bereavement, a divorce, a car crash, sexual abuse, your tolerance levels shrink completely.
Really interesting. I've never heard of that before.
So you wake up, and you're taking 10 steps just to get to the bottom where you're thinking, I can do this.
This is a cool diagram.
I've got it. I've got a picture of it. But the next level of it is that you lose your shit. So those kids at school, by the time they've got their sister up, have had no PE kit, have had no breakfast because mum's too hammered. They walk up the hill to school, it's snowing, they're wet, they're cold, they're starving, they're hungry. They get to school and the teacher says, have you brought the PE kit? And the kid goes, fuck off. That is your level of window of tolerance.
Not all, but some adults and teachers take that as an attack on them. And it's got nothing to do with them.
And then where's their window of tolerance? Where's the teachers? So that Simon Pegg is such a lovely thing that shows that, because it is, we go in and out. And once you start telling people that, you don't think you're nuts. It makes sense, because it is just like, I'm not crazy. So all that time at the end of last year, I'm a hothead, you'll be surprised to know. So I hit a slump, so I went into the depths of the darkness. But the few weeks before that, my children would be able to vouch. Oh my God, she was a nightmare. Because who left this out? And it's like, and normally, you're so chilled.
Why would you do that to
me? Yeah, definitely. And so you do, and then you go into victim mode and blame and anger and attack, and that's when you're at the traffic light, someone's cut you up in traffic. If your window of tolerance is about to go, that's when you get out and you punch them in the face. And that's where resilience comes into it. So I've got a thing with resilience where we talk about we need to be more resilient. The world needs to be more resilient. And actually, I really dispute that, because the only reason people have resilience, first of all, resilience is a mechanism. It's not a way of life. So when you're about to leave your window of tolerance, your resilience would kick in, and it would stop you from smacking the bloke at the traffic lights. It would stop you from giving the V's to the copper as he's told you off or whatever. It would stop you from doing that. Your rational brain has kicked in and it's saying, don't do this, you're going to look a fool. You don't need to do that. But when your window of tolerance is small and you lose it, it's too late sometimes. So the minute everybody came out of COVID and started drinking, I'm going to say blokes in particular, but not necessarily, there was feisty in the pubs, there was an air of aggro and stuff like this. And it's there. And we need to use resilience as a mechanism to stop ourselves from doing that. If we become resilient as a society, we've given up on love, on care, and all of those things. When are we going to start saying society needs to be a kinder, nicer society, rather than let's get stronger to deal with it?
There's a lot of resilience in kindness and compassion and loving one another.
It's far harder to say, don't worry, rather than fuck off, you dickhead.
Altruism in your life, sort of letting them go in front of you. If that does put you out of your day a little bit and you are in a bit of a rush, but somebody's clearly in much more of a rush, there's resilience in me going, do you know what? I've got that about me. Go for it. And I think we've got our attitudes in a skewed philosophy towards certain buzzwords. Resilience, oh, that just means manning up, not crying, getting on with it, doing that. It's like, no. Feel your energies, be resilient with them, be strong, but channel them. And sometimes
there's
maybe
nothing
just
wrong
how
with
it's
being
taught.
firm or even aggro, and you kind of think, our window of tolerance would be burst if somebody harmed our kids, and you'd have every right to leave your window of tolerance then and be like, how dare you? And also your kids need to see those reactions. They need to see that you care enough about something. So I've often worked with parents, again, of victims of sexual abuse, and their dads will say, I haven't kicked off, I haven't done this, I haven't cried. And it's just like, I think your daughter needs to see you cry about it. I think your daughter needs to hear you angry and say, I want to kill him, because you do need to see that. And anger's only a level of healing. You can't just leap from being badly done to into forgiveness and gentleness and everything. You've got to have a time of anger, because it's part of the healing. That doesn't mean you've got any right to go out and stab people.
No.
But it does mean you can be comfortable with your internal rage, and you can sit with that. And if the moment you acknowledge it and sit with it, it dispels very quickly, actually.
I can imagine.
And then you end up in healing.
Are there courses for... Because I think the energies are important to look at. You've got the feminine energy, the masculine energy. And I do think men and women have differences.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be scared to say that, but I am in this day
You
and
had a little
age.
cheeky grin on your face. Like, don't say it.
Thinking about the conversations I've heard, but there are anomalies, and there's feminine men and masculine women and people in between. But on a general, I think it's okay to look at our hormones and how they work and how they see us operate ourselves. So when you're working with people, have you had to work with fathers and stuff? Because I suppose they see themselves as the protector. I was supposed to be here for this person. This happened. The blame comes in. Then the anger starts to bubble. And that's where I suppose the approach has to be different.
There's a level of... I don't work with offenders. I work with... I'm sure I will have worked with paedophiles without knowing, but I've only worked with the victims. And I think it'd be interesting to see what my dad would say. They're just left feeling so guilty, and it's about taking that away. Jimmy Savile groomed the country. You only need to watch that. Michael Jackson groomed the world.
Yeah.
And we still play his music. I still dance to Michael Jackson's music. That is still, for some reason, it's okay, but Gary Glitter isn't.
It's weird at a party when it comes on, because I'm dancing and then suddenly...
You suddenly realise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It does taint it for me.
And there is a real strange way that... and I think you've got to give that to the parents. If my dad knew what his friend was doing to me, he would never have let me see that man again. I know that 100%. I don't know whether I knew it at the time, but I didn't have the thinking then. Why would you think about that when he's a kid? So there is that, and I think it's about letting them go with the guilt and working with their guilt and saying this wasn't your fault. Anybody in their right mind would stop that from happening if they knew it was happening.
I don't know. I don't like to generalise, and I'm trying to be careful here. But this is just a thought, and this is how I learn, by saying stuff and then going, no, that was stupid. For me, I have this vision of a mother finding out. My belief would be she'd go and nurture and love the person that's been victim, and then the father, in my mind, would often be the one to go and want to kill the perpetrator. Is that a common theme you see happen? Yeah,
I would say so. Now, whether it's different, and again, it is tricky, isn't it? Because I think there's a bit of me that just thinks we should speak about sexuality as fully now, because it's just all over. But I am, and I'm older and old school as well, where I do think there's big differences. And I think me being a single parent for such a long time, and I would like to think that I would fill both roles. There are times when I want to go and shoot people in the face, and there are times when, and I always think if it stays in your mind, those things are really harmless. I even say to my kids, I know you're walking away from me thinking everything about me in your head, and that's fine. You can think whatever you like about me, just don't ever say it. I will never say anything. You walk away from me sometimes, I'm like, what and I wouldn't say it. So there's things, so you can shoot somebody over and over again in your head. And actually it means it doesn't do any damage. But I think there is but I don't know whether it's created by gender roles. So, you know, is it because the dad should be the strong one who goes out and bops him on the head, and should the mother be the one who wraps them up and feeds and nurtures? We've possibly created that in the way it is. And me playing both roles maybe allows me to explore both roles, really.
It's hard to ever truly know, isn't it?
I have an interesting thing, and this could be too graphic for you. Feel free to edit it out. But with a link to adoption, I don't have periods. I haven't had a period for maybe 10 years now. And not because I've gone through the menopause, just because I had various things go wrong and so I had to have bits taken out and things. And I don't have a period. But on my birthday, I have a tiny, tiny bleed. And it is something so deep-rooted in my womb and whatever that my adoption affects me. Obviously, it affects me on my birthday. But it affects me. And for years, I'd always thought, every Mother's Day, every birthday, I'd always thought, I wonder where my mum is. I wonder where that woman is. I felt like I should have sent a card or I should have been in touch with her. And obviously now I am. But the feeling, and the only other time it's happened is when I went camping in Keighley. Well, Ribblesdale once, I was doing the 3 Peaks Challenge. And went there and I drove through Keighley and I just had suddenly like cramps and things like that. Never happens. So once a year.
Wow.
And then when I kind of broach something to do with my adoption. So in that thing, when you think about male and female, that could only happen to me because I'm a female.
Yeah.
You know, maybe a male would experience it a different way. But I think there's obvious differences between us. But I'm not saying... Again, there's no judgment there, so it is just a case of like people can do what they like with their masculinity and femininity, but we are different.
I think it's wise when we take that into account because we can have real, honest conversations, authentic conversations about it, and for one another to get a better stance on where the other one's coming from. And there was a doctor, she wrote a book called Testosterone, the Misunderstood Hormone or something.
Okay.
But again, she was sexually abused and she was on this really awesome podcast and she went into her field to study testosterone to sort of disprove it because she wanted to go down the line that people have used it over time to excuse atrocious things,
right,
which is true. But then when she went on her path and all the studying and went to the lectures and saw all the statistics and things being done, it flipped her head and she had to go, well, this is a really interesting hormone to examine.
Yeah.
And she was so fascinated by it. And the lecturers were saying, don't let your emotions get in the way. Don't let this get in the way. Just look at the data, look at the data. And eventually she wrote a book about it because it was so overwhelming. And she had a husband and boys that she was looking after. And she said she saw them in such different light after she'd been and done all this studying. It's an interesting podcast to listen to.
And it's the same about the teenage brain as well. You know, when people talk about the teenage brain just changes. I don't know a lot about it, so I can't tell you much about it. But just that time that's needed, the sleep pattern that's needed. And again, because we're channeled by the norms of society, and we have been for generations and generations, people get too scared to break the rules. They get too scared to change that form. So what she's doing there, she's learned about it and she reads. And I mean, they do. Everything makes so much different. The way we look after our gut, I mean, James, you'll be able to say about this, but the way you look after your gut and how that feeds your brain and your neurosystems and everything is so important.
It's just taking a big pool of possibilities into when somebody's in dysfunction and being able to work with it and being able to sort of come to terms with there's a magnitude of possibilities of what this could be. And we can really layer it down. But that's my only worry with the PC quote-unquote culture can be we're having to try and sidestep around everything. I don't like just old school approaches.
No.
But I don't like having to negate past just science.
Yeah.
And how things have evolved over time and how we're not that far from monkeys. We're really not.
And I think for me, there's the understanding the emotional brain. There's something, and I think everybody should just know a little bit of neuroscience. And we live in a high alarm world, especially as we're coming out of COVID. There's this kind of suddenly everybody's wanted, me included, like, let's change all of this, throw it up and go and do something new. And we're living in high alarm.
Yeah.
And when you've got your amygdalas, your panic alarm system in your brain, so when your amygdala's ringing like mad, it is like having
fight or flight.
The burglar alarm going off in your head.
Yes.
Constantly. Who's going to get me next? How am I going to get a job? How am I going to survive this month? What happens if I quit my job? What happens if I do this? What happens if I expose myself as a victim of sexual abuse? All of those things are there, narratives living. And we're living in a high alarm society. So it is really important to know about things like testosterone and how they carve and how they impact on your brain, really.
And I just thought about the brain in general. It is sort of the frontal lobe. A lot of people are too young to be taking substances at certain ages, and they don't know that before your brain's formulated, it's usually around 25.
Yeah.
To start adding in weed and drink and so on into that. Building identity, you're going to find a lot of struggles and complications within that.
Well, you've got the hippocampus in your brain, so it's the earliest part. I mentioned it when I was talking about being in the womb. It's the first start of the brain to start growing. It's a long sausage type bit of the brain, and that's like your photo bank. It's like your filing cabinet with all your photos in. So every single thing that happens has your hippocampus, and then what happens is when there's a trauma or an upset or something, you get a break in your hippocampus, brain damage, really. So sexual abuse, you don't know what the story is. I can't remember. The thing that got me in court was, and what did you have on that day? What day was this? It's like, I was 12 years old, mate. I've lived a life since then, and Jesus, I've lived it, And there was that, but my hippocampus, it just got blocks in it. So you're absolutely right. When you've got young'uns who are kind of abusing, really, the brain, then it is going to cause implications further on, and would have more blocks, And I think that does come with being people who are reckless in their relationships or reckless in the way they live. The breaks in their hippocampus will be far more than people who are more cautious. It's an amazing. I thought about being a car mechanic. I've always wanted to train to be a car mechanic, and I might still do it, mainly so I can fix the van. But it's like a car engine. The car engine, cortisol is the coolant for the engine, and I'd love to do some workshops with kids, particularly boys, but with girls as well, but to do workshops around a car engine and understanding the emotional brain. And if you take that off me, I'll have you.
Nah, that's what I like to do, actually.
You can just
grab
like to steal ideas and take them.
Run away with it. Christy, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed it. You need to do a podcast. Do you know, we've been doing, this is 2 hours. We're 2 hours in. Like, there's so much scope and possibility for directions that we could walk down. I've in all parts of those timelines we've spoken about, I feel there's episodes to go for each moment. I'm really glad we did this big eclectic one, though, to really get an idea of you. And when we rock out at parties together now, I'm going to look at you in a different light. the same loving eyes that I've always looked at you in, but with a deeper understanding now.
No, we'll dance harder.
I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
From everything we spoke about there, just say somebody's listened to this to the end because they're inspired, or they feel a similar way, or in any part of the story it's just resonated in some way. Do you have any advice for those people that may be struggling with mental health?
I think it's okay to put your armour on at times when it's needed, and I think to keep your armour on and to keep yourself safe. One thing, the really standard thing is 3 forms of gratitude. Think about things you're grateful for. I was in the van the other night with my dad and my mum. I'd gone up she died in January, we'd gone up to move stuff out the house, and it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, this is just going to be too hard. I always sleep in my van. Even if I came and you said, do you want to come and sleep in the swanky farmhouse? I'd say, no, I'm fine in my van, thanks. So even at my dad's, I sleep in the van. And it was starting to dip. Just dipping into a bit of a shit, my mum's dead, this is awful, blah, blah, blah. And it was thundering with rain on the van, and I started to get annoyed with the rain on the roof. And then I loved the sound of the rain on the roof. So all of a sudden it was my darkness that was saying, and now it's raining really hard and I can't get to sleep. And I turned it round into, I love the sound of the rain on the roof. And I think it's just looking around, appreciating, and taking a step back every morning, even now. I wake up and I check from head to body, how am I feeling today? Those first moments, how am I feeling? And even if the answer is I'm feeling low or I'm feeling scared, then you know to go into your day and avoid the people who are going to make you feel more scared. Or avoid, we've all done it. What can I do? Why am I feeling edgy about going out? I'm going out because I'm not feeling good enough to go out today. And just to be able to step back and pause and acknowledge. If you can begin, we have everything. Those, you get a twinge in your belly, we'll watch a film, you feel sick, you get an ache in your neck, and everything. Our bodies tell us all the time how we're doing. They tell us all the time how we're doing. And when you can step back for a minute and think, why am I feeling sick? Why is my temperature high? Why is my temperature low? What is happening? You will be able to walk through life in an easier way, or at least with awareness. The problem is when we rattle through life and we don't stop and pause and think about ourselves, and we run into people and this jolts us and it kind of causes us problems. And it's, again, that high alarm amygdala. And you need to be able to just stop and think, why? I'm just feeling a bit anxious. What can I do? I'm not going to go to that shop. I'm going to go that way.
That's really good. And I really I like that. Again, it's an acceptance that you're not going to feel brilliant and joyful all the time, but having an awareness to when you do feel that, or when you do feel low, what are you going to do in that time of low? That's stunning. That gives me a lot less pressure in life. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel I have to be on top form all the time. And I think I was faking it for a while. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, people, or I thought people saw me. Do you like that quote? You're not who you think you are. You're who you think they think you are. Wild quote, but yeah, in other people's perceptions, you're like, oh, I'm this smiley, happy-go-lucky character. So everywhere you are, you're like, hey guys, here I am. And you're like, that's exhausting.
And there's a pressure then with it, isn't there? Because when you're at home and you say you're here ready to put a night on, and actually you're on a day where you're thinking, I'm not feeling this tonight.
Ready, and
then you use your cans of beer.
And do I ever. But, and I suppose it's growing a strength within it as well, isn't there? Because you will get people who exacerbate it because they say, what's up with you? You're not the same character you usually are. What's up with you? And it's all this, what's up with you? But if you grow that strength of self-awareness of, well, I'm just going to be authentic to the feeling and how I am today, you don't have to be put off or annoyed or irritated by that what's up with you, because that's just a reflection of them then. Sort of how they've internalized you should be. And it's for other people to understand, let people just be, and when they're not on that form, try not to exacerbate it. But if they do, that's
we're getting better at it. I do think there's more, people. But then I also think there's too many excuses. It's not like a natural mental health awareness. It's like this is like this is like this. And we need to shift that. And I think, in particular for males, I do genuinely think that's where males and females are different, and that they're nowhere near as ready as women.
Honestly, we could do an episode on that, couldn't we?
And then we'll get all kinds of slander.
Oh, don't worry. I've had it all now. I can't.
Can't
go for any more. I've had it. I'm done.
I don't care if you like me or not. I'm just going to say.
I'll tell you what. There's refreshment in that as well, isn't there? Do you know when I read the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck? Have you ever read that book?
I have.
It's really
there
simple.
There is just that. Definitely.
I like that saying in mental health. It's simple, but it's not easy, and that's true. There's a lot towards it where it's the basic principles apply, but it's not always easy to put into place. Do you know what I mean? So I've loved this. Just let people, would you be happy for somebody to get in contact with you if they wanted to?
Man.
Would you let people know where to get in
contact I'm on Facebook as Curly Ginger Christy, and do I do email? ChristyClaire@gmail.com. And
Perfect.
Man, ask away.
Do you
and give me a job.
You're talking like that's like a wood pigeon where you send it off with a letter. No, email's still a thing, man. 100%.
I'm not giving you my phone number though.
I'll do my bit. Guys, you've been a part of the Old Farm Bus, Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. Thank you for this. I'm going to leave you on this. Be nice to one another, you beautiful set of buggers. That's all you got to do. Be nice. See you later.